Hello, welcome to the Square-based podcast, YouTube, and Society, a subsidiary of the Old World Gaming Network. I'm your co-host, Rob, and with me is my co-host and the man with the most, Mr. Val Heffelfinger. And today we're going to be talking about the movement phase in Warhammer the Old World. Hello, Val. How are you?
I am so good, Rob. So good, man. How are you?
Yeah, really struggled into society there as a word, but nearly got there. I'm excited about our WWE style intros in the future.
More laser sound effects then. Roger. I'll add it to the list of required assets.
Well, I'll do the visuals. I'll make them spin across if that's what you want. Yeah, is that good?
Beautiful.
Yeah,
yes, good. I'll get myself a little dry ice machine in here. It'll be fantastic.
Dry ice. That would be so good if you emerged from mist. So technically,
you could probably do it.
Go on, after you.
No, I could probably do it with some sort of technical shenanigans, but no, I think I'd have to go. I like practical effects, Rob. I'm an old world guy. I don't want any of those. I don't want any of that CGI stuff. Even though I'm standing in front of a green screen.
Now I just picture you throwing a smoke bomb and just vanishing off the screen, which is just
gone. He's out of here.
So technically, this is episode 2 of Square-based, the official Square-based show versus the kind of the preamble that was on the Honest Wargamer YouTube channel and stuff. So welcome everyone to episode 2, which should be exclusively uploaded at this point to our YouTube, which will happen maybe today, maybe tomorrow, which is fun. So I hope you've all enjoyed that. And if you are watching this on YouTube or listening to it as a podcast, it's available as both. If you go into the comments or into the description on this YouTube video, you're going to see all of the links, and there is links to, quite excitingly, all of our social media pages, the podcast, which you can listen to, and also, which is just the audio rip of this show, and then also our Patreon, which is a Patreon where you can just support the show and say, basically, I want old world content, and that Patreon automatically will add you to our brand new Discord, where you'll be able to start sharing your love and excitement for Old World. And if you are already an Honest Wargamer subscriber, then don't worry, your subscription to that already gets you automatic entrance to that. But it's mainly to build a space, because me and Val talked about this offline. It's to build a space directly for the Old World community, or at least our Old World community. I think that's the right thing.
We need a base space.
Yeah, we need a base space, which is important. Also, we got to talk. We're talking later, but we got to set up that Facebook page, and that's going to be not my area. That's your sole dominion there, buddy. I ain't going there.
Hey, you know what? I never left, and it never got better. And Facebook is hey. I feel like there's a fair chunk of the Square-based demographic on the old blue pages. So yeah, I think we should represent there if we can. Yeah, it's all very exciting, and I look forward to having a place to go to by default on Discord, because I am personally overwhelmed every time I go on Discord, and then I check my DMs, and then I close the window. That's basically what I do. It's hard for me to keep up with the Discord sometimes.
Well, so I used to have a public Discord for the Honest Wargamer, but last year when I started to get real serious, 5 years into my career, I was like, John, I want to set up a specific space that's only for the people who want to support what I do. And actually, I found that to be a much more comfortable space. So I wasn't overwhelmed. People didn't have agendas. We generally were chit chat and we agree, disagree, discuss stuff heartily, which I think is really fun. And I'm excited about that space be evolving as well. Me and Tobias, or Tobias in the chat, has been working on this kind of list builder thing, which has been really fun. We're going to try and one day it might be fun to try and translate to the old world. Me and Tom have been working on stats for the Honest Wargamer, which we've done previously before, but now we're working on a more complete solution. Excited about doing that for the old world as well. Creating events. Excited about that. There's so much stuff I want to that Discord's going to be able to eventually do in the future, which is super exciting.
We're a heartbeat away from t-shirts, man. This is amazing.
Oh, we're doing t-shirts, bro. Come on. Are you joking me?
I can't wait to order some t-shirts.
Square-based. Oh, we can get some merch. Do you want merch? We need oh my god, we need the whole kit. We need the arc of attack angle
I'm actually there. You will get one. You'll get one for the Squarebase GT. Actually, it would be really great to use some of our assets to make the Squarebase GT logo properly, aside from the just the words that I used, because I was afraid to do anything other than that. So we could put that on the line of sight protractor.
Well, listen, all of this excitement about the channel is easily gazumped, but also is inspired from the fact that we're getting tasty rules morsels, which we're going to cover today. Absolutely exciting. That's what we're going to dive into. So this excitement, this kind of like professionalism, hopefully is an indication of how serious we're going to take all of the old world content in the future, but also how excited generally we both are about old world stuff. Like so much stuff we want to talk about. Talk about lore, rules, background, events, stats, just like the one-shot package, which is very fun, and I'm very much looking forward to it as well.
Man. I'm knee deep in actual hobby prep. Been slap chopping again, Rob.
Whoa. Okay, slap chopping
again. I got some. I've developed. I did all my basing. I've done. I'm working on Adam Camilleri's Ogres right now before I get onto your Lizardmen.
Okay, fine.
And so I did a Firebelly, and he was terrible. And I learned something. That if you botch your application of contrast, which sometimes it happens, it gets blotchy and stuff. You can throw a wash over top of it, and it sort of just ties the whole room together.
Oh, that's cute. Yeah, that's fun. Generally, if you're getting blotchiness, you haven't watered. Like I always water down like 50-50 the contrast. Like it's such a like. Well, look, we're already cheating, so we slap chopping. So it feels so easy to just dip that brush in that pot and crack on. But like mixing it is the right answer.
Well, also I even find like sometimes, slap chopping taught me that dry brushing is in fact a skill. Like it's not actually just like these. Just like it is a technique you can get good at, but also like it's pretty easy to accidentally be a little chalky or a little heavy in spots. And when you put the contrast over, because it kind of glazes that, if like you have like if there's like sometimes you get like these weird patchy things. Anyway, I use a little bit of the soft tone Army Painter on there. My favorite washes are Army Painter, and it was wonderful. So anyway, I was just sharing that. Saved it.
I'm a little bit torn because I've printed out a Chaos Dwarf army now, and then I'm about to finish off printing off the good old Bretonians, and then I'm asking myself about my paint technique because Bretonians I feel like it should be an army that I desperately want to love and do all the heraldry on. But I am really obsessed with streaking grime right now, and like it wasn't it wasn't really something that was used overly much back in the day. So I quite like the idea of a grim dark Bretonian army. You know, go for slightly more like mottled colours. Don't go for the bright pageantry and livery that's potentially possible, or maybe even do that and then like darken it down with streaking grime and stuff. So I gotta make a decision there at the moment. I'm not really sure. Obviously, it works. Well, go on.
Oh, you can go with like a spooky, because there's a lot of undead activity, despite them being too tired to be part of the old world right now. You could do like a pre-Mousillon, turning to the vampire, red kiss, whatever nonsense, so like you can have a bunch of really sort of spooky looking knights, the Sylvania of Bretonia, if you will.
But I'm also really obsessed with humans at the moment, and I keep looking at like what an empire army may look like. But I think because of the time that the game is going to be set in, obviously we're going to have. I don't know if we'll get regiments. You'll get city regiments, but I don't know if you'll have like a standardized standard militarized like grouping that you did with Empire. And if you might end up with more like city, like sure, like we've got some halberdiers. Maybe. Well,
that's the way. Like, Empire was already like that. Like, there was no like unified imperial color. They're all state troops, right? So they're always coming. They're like Space Marine chapters that way, I guess. I've never put that together. But yeah, they're always coming in their like home turfs heraldry or regalia. Like for example, the bulk of my force are a bunch of country bumpkins from Sterling, and they got the yellow and the green.
Oh, cute. Country bumpkins, that's cute. I like. I think I want to go for some lads. Obviously,
some real lads.
Some lads. Oh no, I need a pie to fight them orcs. Also,
some Middenheimers or some Nullnists. Nullnians.
Yeah, it's going to be a toughie. Also, kind of worried about my pronunciation. I'm gonna have to fluently jump between Uruks and Orcs quite often, and that's going to be a tough one for me long term.
There are now 3 canon ways to spell orc, which is kind of funny.
Yeah, it's a toughie.
Yeah. Tell me you like the old world without telling me you like the old world. Oh, right. I see.
Shall we jump into these rules? Because this is exciting stuff. Should we do that?
Straight into it. All right, let's go, buddy.
Okay, rumors at the end. That's the secret
rumors
sauce.
We have rumors? I didn't even know we had rumors. We can.
I don't know if we got rumors, but we'll see. Okay, so
this one's really awesome, guys. This is a special. I mean, they're all gonna be special to me, all of these reveals. But Rob, this is special.
This is super exciting, and I agree. Mainly because we talked about this last week. We said movement's the most important factor for how a game plays. That just is. You know, some games are wildly dynamic, like Shatterpoint. Then you kind of got like your mid-range like dynamism that you have with obviously 40k and Age of Sigmar. And then as I described last week, I feel like this is more linear. Static is what I used last week. Maybe linear is probably a little bit of a nicer word to use. But we got some really fun rules about the movement phase, which is really going to define most of what happens in a game. Right, so we've got this here. So formation's the first thing we're going to talk about. And the formations that you could take. I'll read out what the article says and we could chat about it. All units in the game must adopt a formation, which will dictate how they act in battle, including moving and fighting. Most units can only adopt one, close order, though some can also choose options such as skirmish or open order. And for Bretonnian Knights, the Mighty Lance formation. Okay, and then I'll just read the bit underneath. Close orders are units arrayed in base-to-base contact, facing the same direction, in order to fight in ranks. Where possible, there must be the same number of models in each rank, with more models in the rank than the file, which sometimes means leaving spaces in the back rank if necessary. They move and fight as a single entity, walking, wheeling, charging, exposing their flanks and rears. The more full ranks you have, the greater your advantage in combat. And then when you need to move rapidly, you can turn into a marching column. But let's go back and talk about formations. Val, how do you feel about formations?
Oh man, I think it's cool. I mean, specifically, what's cool here is we're getting some, when we last met Warhammer Fantasy, we basically had Horde formation. So Horde formation gave a benefit, right, and that allowed you to fight in 2 extra ranks rather than 1. You had to be 10 wide. And caused great consternation for many people. But it was still neat that depending on how you arrayed your forces or your dudes on their tray, they got a benefit, right? And now we're seeing even just a few hints here of a couple different formations that will give different benefits in the game, and it also kind of opens up TM, subsidiary of the Honest Wargamer. Design space to come up with other neat ways of arranging your dudes on their trays to give different.
I was about to say that 100%. That's actually one of the most exciting things. Showing the lance formation, which is a pretty famous one, famous, obviously, and maybe that's going to be exclusive to Bretonnians, but it does give them the option of creating more formations in the future. Although I'm not really sure about the pyramid style formation the Tomb Kings are going to get. That'll be weird.
Yeah, we're going fully 3-dimensional with the Tomb King.
Up in the top.
Even like the lance formation, I guess I would have played with it, but I have no real recollection of it. I do see folks, because it was gone by 6th edition, so the edition that most people seem to love the most. They sort of just went to a 3-wide rectangle is what the lance became. I think just for ease of use. So I'm very curious to see the rules behind the lance formation and how it works, especially when you're flank charging it. How do you line a square up to a triangle? You know what I mean? A bit tricky.
I couldn't agree with you more. I think it's actually a big problem, and being pointed out in the chat as well that 3 wide at the front kind of made a little bit more sense. From a game, because you ended up with a rectangle shape. So I agree.
Yeah.
Although
ultimately, once when the formation hits, I think I remember the old way being basically that you got to fight with more frontage than a regular cavalry formation might, because everyone's sort of like the lance collapses, right? Like basically like everyone on the edges gets to fight.
Yep.
So yeah, I don't know. We'll see. It'll be interesting, and it's just, to me, very evocative, the lance formation, because the tip of the spear, and you can really imagine it just mowing through a group of bros.
It's going to look great on the tabletop. And I think one of the things that I find very attractive about the Old World is that we are going to get, like, your movement phase is very simple. You normally are moving, 6 to 10 units, but you're not moving multiple models. You just move in a tray. Move this tray, move that tray. And the movement's also pretty slow as well, generally, compared to, like, things like stupid planes in 40K, etc. So, like,
oh, hold on a second. Let's not blow any leads here, pal.
Okay, I apologize, but like the
podcast about to go triple time. All right, yes, continue.
But it's a very fun and engaging and quick way to represent something. And I think if this had happened, in 7th, 8th edition, and you were like, oh, my models can't tessellate, you'd be like, we will answer you in 3 to 5 years on that. But I feel like that they're going to. There's an answer there. Like, the problem that we have with that, there's no way someone doesn't look at that and ask immediately, how does it rank up? And then there's obviously immediately an answer. So I don't think that's a concern, personally.
How about that skirmish formation, though, bud?
Huge fan of this, actually. If I could, huge fan, mainly because I don't think that got given that kind of like keyword, because it says it's going to be keyword based, right? Like, it wasn't given to.
Where did it say? Have they actually said that? I mean, I would hope so, but have they actually confirmed that anywhere? I don't know if they blatantly said that.
They said something about though some can only choose options such as skirmish or open order. Oh no, it didn't say that. But like, I'm assuming
I can't imagine it won't be. Yeah, there'll be. If we go back to the last week, I'm sure we would notice a bunch of bolded words and shit.
Yeah. They mentioned it further down. Oh, thank you. I thought that there was a mention of it. Oh, units with a skirmisher special rule. Okay, so not a keyword, but the universal special rule do not need to rank up at all. So that is there, and I love that because that's really fun. Because I think that was something that was very limited. Almost felt like an afterthought when I played previously in Warhammer Fantasy Battles, and I like that they might really push into that and give unit roles into armies via formations. Feels great, in my personal opinion. Yeah, I like that. What do you think of that?
It's really cool. And then, like, specifically with the skirmish formation, like right now, and I don't know how far back this style of skirmish goes, but essentially you're half an inch apart. So you're still ranked, but there's basically a half-inch spacing between all the models in the formation for skirmishers right now. So they look like a little more loosely formed. And then they have rules benefits, but on the table they don't really move much more freely aside from fast cavalry. So it's cool to see them actually sort of in your 40K AOS, like, or any skirmish game style where they're constrained by unit coherency. What I'm curious to know more about is how that actually functions on the tabletop, because in order to have them not in their ranks, what's their facing? So in fantasy and old world, I guess I gotta start saying old world, bud?
Yeah,
this ain't no fantasy anymore. This is the old world.
How do you feel about that? Because you've been such a huge fantasy stan for the past few years. Like, is it gonna be a toughie?
No, I'm just I got to adjust it. I guess no. What, did anyone ever call AOS Warhammer Fantasy? Probably not.
No. But
anyway, new branding. I guess so in the old world, you will find that basically the arc of sight, or like that unit has, which is I guess 45 degrees off of each long edge from its front. That's its front facing. That's what it can see. Anything it can see, as we discover later, it can charge. Also, shooting is generally speaking constrained by that front arc. The front arc is really, really important because it really elevates the movement game, because if you can maneuver your troops and get your units outside of someone's front arc, you're untouchable. So although you might be very close or in what seems like a dangerous scenario, like a dangerous situation, you're in fact safe from being charged or in most cases shot. So with the skirmishers being arranged like that, it's going to be a little hard to determine what their front arc is, which leads me to believe that they probably might have a more traditional skirmisher 360-degree line of sight, which means that they will be able to be much more annoying with their shooting than maybe other units can, and actually do like that sort of harassment job that a skirmisher is supposed to do. So I think it's really neat. Also, being able to string out a formation like that in fantasy, in the old world, is going to be very what's the word? Annoying, because you can use that again in the role that skirmishers play to really block off charge lanes, to make it really hard for someone to get to stuff behind you, because you could string out a unit like that and cover a lot of distance. All of those things make that skirmisher formation is a lot more interesting to me than the current skirmisher formation. So already we're seeing sort of an improvement.
Yeah, I think it's definitely an improvement. It feels very neat and well written, and the pictures also really make me feel like they're like, look, this is how it works, and explaining it. And I am really excited about different types of formations. I really am. Mm-hmm. Even if it's like, we've got close order, but if there's like, a regiment of renown, and it's always 5x5. Like, it just is 5x5 like that. It just has to how it like, that's how it is. So it'd be quite interesting. I like that. The idea of
it makes me think too, like maybe different weapons have different benefits in different formations. Like if you have spears in your close order, maybe if you're taking a charge from cavalry, you get some sort of a bonus. That's sort of that standing fast thing. That's, a big deal in Total War.
Oh, that's a cool idea. Yeah, so charge bonus is cool. Yeah, that's fun. Yeah, that's very fun. Or even maybe something against shooting. Who knows? Same thing.
Yeah, if you got shields in your close order, maybe that's how you get a benefit from your shield. That'd be, so you can turtle up like the Romans.
Yeah.
So yes. Don't mean to trigger everyone to think about the Roman Empire, but there you are.
Yeah, I love the idea of a shield wall. That's a great idea. Okay, so I think formation stuff has got me very excited, mainly for what it says, but also for what it potentially
got me in a full-on marching column.
Oh, let's go. When they need to move rapidly, your unit's going to adopt a marching column, reforming into a shape that's deeper than it is wide. A unit formed in this way may not charge and earns no ranked bonus in combat, but it can move at triple speed. That's very crazy. Fast. Very fast. So what do you think about the marching column section?
So this is going to be one. So first of all, this one's causing great consternation over on Old World Facebook group.
Oh no!
Because, and I think they might have somewhat of a point here, which is that so you can still march. So basically, you've got different rates of movement that you can do. If you just walk normally, or you just do your normal move, say 4 inches for a human, you'd be able to usually shoot with a penalty. And then if you march, you double your movement, and you can no longer shoot. There's some downsides. Usually also, if you're going through terrain, you might have to take a terrain check, that kind of a thing, because you're moving faster. But those are just things you say, and it's dictated by how far you go. By going to the marching column, it means that you actually physically have to re-rank your guys, which is triggering, I think, for a lot of legacy players. And this might be where larger base sizes really come in handy, because by default, hopefully, if you've rebased or at least put them on spaced out trays, they won't be so bloody tangled up in one another. Right. And so it might be a little easier to shift your dudes around to change formations on the fly. Whereas right now it's like Barrel of Monkeys. I don't know. Do you have Barrel of Monkeys in the United Kingdom where you have to like hook one guy and they all tangle to one another?
No.
Anyway.
Well, I don't know.
So there's a bit of a complaint. There's a bit of complaint around the fact that you have to physically change the formation, because that slows the game down, ironically, when you're trying to go fast. The other thing that in my head I'm thinking about is in the Old World, they reference it here, but they don't actually get into details about reforming. So in 8th edition, there was an innovation called the Swift Reform, which meant if you had a musician, you were able to, if you passed a leadership check, you'd be able to actually just change your formation entirely and also your facing, and then do a normal move. So it was a pretty neat little thing that you could do. But it also meant that you couldn't charge that turn, obviously, because you were reforming. And on something like this, you have to consider that if you go triple speed, so say that's 12 inches for a human, that, and then in the next turn, if you still have this swift reform, you could go another 4 inches, which gets you to 16, and facing in a different direction. However, you could also just march twice, or march once and then charge. So I'm curious to see, depending on like how, essentially you are getting to move triple the distance, but I don't know if that's enough to make up for the fact that you're losing an extra turn of relevance because you're going to have to reform. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I do.
So I'll be curious. Like, I'm not going to say this is a game that has been play tested and worked out. But I'm just curious to see in that order of operations, are there units that are able to, reform in the strategy phase, for example, because that would be before you declare your chargers. That would be something really cool. Or maybe there's heroes or abilities that allow you to do that reform. So you could march maybe in the first turn or second turn, and then suddenly be in a real nasty position to come around the edges. But I love the idea of like deploying, certainly flanking units in marching columns so that they can get some deep penetration. But who knows how it'll actually play out? What about you?
I'd say that what you just touched on there is a reform in the strategy phase is a really good point. I feel like, and again, I was talking about TMs, the design space so incredibly underutilized in because Warhammer Fantasy Battle had almost no iterations. Rob, I hear you cry in the YouTube comments. There are 8 editions, you idiot, you jerk. Yeah, and I'm like, those editions were spread over decades, and also, those books in some cases weren't iterated for years upon years. And since then, say what you like about Games Workshop's 3-year cycle for their games, and I've said a lot of terrible things about them. They've had to iterate, even if they've not done it well, even if it's some stupid idea written on a whiteboard and put to print. They have consistently attacked areas of the game, and for what is a fairly slow game as well, D&D has got so much fan fiction, or when you play Total War, there's so many mods which add and iterate elements into the game, and many times those iterations get added into the core game, which is true. What's nice about this game is I feel like we're going to see a lot of those. It's going to feel like, I think it's always going to feel like Warhammer Fantasy Battle, but it's going to feel like Warhammer Fantasy Battle would have felt like in 2150 if it had never been cancelled. Does that make sense? You'd be like, wow, you just add a lot of stuff in.
Yeah, one of the early designer diaries, they the first rules peak that they did, where they talked about anything rules related, they said that they had been playing, every edition of Warhammer Fantasy Battles, and they're going to cherry pick, the coolest and best mechanics from that. Marching column, apparently, this is just what I've seen from reading, is something that was available as an option in Warhammer Ancients. And so Warhammer Ancients is a Games Workshop produced, I guess when the Perry twins were there, and I think also Rick Priestley was big into it, was their historical rule set, and actually was published for a long time. It was available to buy, up until I don't know, somewhat recent history. I would say just before probably the end times. So this sort of takes from that. And so it's funny seeing sort of some of the split on whether or not this is a good thing. Comes down to, are you someone who played Warhammer Ancients because they really liked it? Yes, Warhammer Ancients, also known as sort of a tight version of sort of a similar styled game as Warhammer Fantasy was.
Oh no, this is a Metallica situation, isn't it? I can't get into this. I can't. We can't.
What do you mean?
So when I like alternative music, and they're and obviously bands that emerge now, or even in the past 5-10 years or 20 years, if you will, are obviously greatly informed by those that came before them. They stood upon the shoulders of giants. Like,
Sure.
Black Sabbath should go down in its history as the most, like, one of the most innovative set of musicians the world has ever seen. But in 2023, I don't need you to come up to me and be like, "Hey, Rob, we really should be listening to Metallica." And I'll be like, no, they're old as fuck. Yeah, right. They've got nothing left to say. Shut up. Right.
Right.
I don't want to hear it. Yeah, everything's old. So, like, I really respect the respect that we put onto these older game designers. I really do. I think that's an important thing to, their place in history is important, and I'm sure many of them have iterated themselves and developed themselves over time.
Absolutely.
But I do not need to be like, oh, this guy wrote 4th edition Orcs and Goblins, and therefore this game will be brilliant. And I'm like, that was written on a napkin. You had to roll on a D66 table, and I would have no. Like, I don't want any part of that. Does that make sense?
That makes sense. And actually, we're coming up on a reveal as well that has, I warned you, was going to be contentious, and it has been contentious. But I think actually in this case, it's the grognards being like, "What's the big deal? Marching columns are awesome." And all of the 6th edition people who are, I would call them the insufferables. No one's out there like beating the drum for like how amazing and perfect 8th edition was. I love 8th edition, but I know it's got its fault. Whereas rose tinted glasses only for 6th edition, and it's insufferable. So it was cool to see the Warhammer Ancients guys, who are by definition more ancient than the 6th edition guys, coming to the defense of this rule. So yeah.
All right, perfect. Love that. Okay, so I think, like you've said, and the exciting element is that I think this is going to be Warhammer Fantasy Battles in the year 2150. I think, like you've said, the ability to reform your formations in the strategy phase might be
it might be a thing. Yeah,
a unique faction thing. It'll most likely to be bloody elves, though, won't it? Fucking hell.
Almost certainly.
Almost certainly.
Although Gav Thorpe's not there writing stuff, so who knows how the elves will pan out? But we'll see.
So the movement phase, there's plenty more to it than that, but now it's time to look at the movement phase. This is, as with every phase in the game, divided into 4 parts. The first of these is declare charges, in which the active player nominates each unit that they want to charge and their targets. Charging is the only way to enter combat, and there are a couple of caveats. The target must be visible to your unit and at least partially in its front arc, and your unit cannot be fleeing, rallied or have rallied this turn, or already engaged in combat. You may, however, pre-measure the distance to your targets. Let's go! Okay, so number one, how do you feel? And how do the grognards feel?
So again, because I think a lot of the, okay, I'll be honest here, Facebook discourse is dominated by 6th edition players. There's a lot of pissy people about this, because there is.
Oh my God!
Look. No. Lead with empathy, bro. Okay. We're based here. Okay? Lead with empathy. Okay. There is some fun in nailing a guess. In nailing, dropping a rock thrower and guessing, 42 inches, and it's right in the square in the center of someone's head, and you managed not to cheat to do that. There is something to be said about the dance that 6th edition eventually became, because you couldn't pre-measure. And charges were, I believe it was just 12 inches. So the second you were in 12 inches, you could charge. If you declare your charge and you're outside of 12, you're pooched. So being able to judge those distances, I guess assuming you weren't cheating, there was an element, I guess, of learned skills there and being able to estimate that. Or in some ways, it's probably just some level of natural ability. Some people aren't very good with spatially being able to judge that kind of stuff. So I can see the fondness for it. Also, if it's the only thing you've ever done, because the only edition of Warhammer Fantasy that had pre-measuring was 8th edition, and random charges was 8th edition. So I could see how it would be like a very big departure if you've managed to never, ever change in your ways this whole time. So I get where they're coming from. However, as we're going to reveal as Rob keeps coming down this, I think they've stolen something really good from a one might say independently developed version of Warhammer Fantasy Battles, known as the Warhammer Armies Project, that makes charges with random distance pretty cool.
Okay, well, I would say that one of the things that immediately jumps out to me on this is I love that you can pre-measure. This obviously, in my opinion, it would be the stupidest decision in the world. Following on from that, also, like, it's crazy thinking about like the sheer volume of like Total War nerds that might eventually pick up this game, and then they've spent their entire life being like, okay, what's the range of what's the potential range of my cannon when I'm in the real battle? What's the range of my archers? Okay, I know what that is, and then you're like, no, just guess, and they'd be like, this is awful. I hate this. This sucks, right? And also incredibly open to abuse, like a pure game mechanic, which is so open to abuse. Like to me, there is no larger gap of abuse available here than no pre-measuring. Like just being like, oh, because you can't even confirm with your opponent that something. You'd be like,
yes,
like, oh,
and that's to me the crux of why it's a terrible mechanic is because we've learned through pre-measuring that to stop yourselves from having like either feeling bad or arguing about stuff, you measure first and then you roll your dice, because that means that you both agree to what the distance is. Whereas if you have to declare first and then measure, well, whether or not it's 11 3/4 or 12.001 is going to be a bit of a contentious moment, even if you're playing casually.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it is a dumb thing in the fullness of time. I think it's quite obviously dumb to have, guess ranges and guess charges and not have pre-measuring. So, and hey, if those guys in their garages and their, if they actually do play, one commenter I read was like, well, I only ever play by myself, so I prefer pre-measuring. I was like, that's the worst argument for pre-measuring I've ever seen. Wow, forever alone. Go to an event. But anyway, so yes, obviously, I think pre-measuring is fantastic. I think it's quite obvious from the community reaction, though, that this was actually more contentious than I think you can appreciate, despite how obviously better it is.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I honestly could not engage in those conversations. I'm like, number one, a thank you from me to you for delving into the mines, being surrounded by absolute nonsense on a daily basis. That must be tough. Because
I was originally so upset by it. I actually left the Old World forums some time ago, and then I realized, I think we had a conversation probably about Nazis, unrelated. But I just realized that there are just trolls out there. And some of these people genuinely believe what they're saying. A lot of them are just trolling. And so I decided, you know what? I'm just going to troll the trolls or the people who have bad opinions. And it's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, yeah. Also, yeah, like Declan says, if you want no pre-measuring, then you're being ableist to the people who, I don't know, can't do that, or a million other things. I'll get you in some way, you idiots. Right, okay. All right, next. After all this, the inactive player declares charge reactions. Most units may hold to receive the charge. Stand and shoot if they have missile weapons and are further away than the charge unit's movement characteristic, or flee by pivoting around 180 degrees and trying to escape. Like, just cheese it, lads. If you're caught, however, you'll be run down and destroyed. Beyond that, some especially alert units may countercharge. Dun, 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 dun.
Countercharge is interesting.
Again, the design space here, excellent. The ability to give individual units their own unique charge reactions, external to, I think is something we're absolutely going to see, or I hope we see. One particular unit just has a, and we have talked about that. You just kind of talked about like a shield wall, maybe a very defensive unit, has hold, but they have an even better version of hold where,
sure. That is what shield wall was in 8th edition for the dwarves. Yeah, I think they got +1 strength.
Yeah. So I think that I'm so excited about that. I know that charge reactions is already a thing, but I love that. I think that's great.
if they play with it, play around with it, that it will be awesome. I mean, like you can, and even in eighth, again, a lot of these things they had, like they just weren't necessarily emphasized or developed more, like you were saying, really, right? So, like, for example, fast cavalry in eighth edition, and maybe other editions too. I don't know. If they flee as a charge reaction, normally that means you got to take the time to rally the next turn. Then you can reform and you're standing around. But a fast cav unit can flee and then the next turn rally and then carry on. They can move and shoot. They can't charge. So that gave them sort of a flee plus style charge reaction, which is kind of neat. What do you think countercharge is, Bud?
It's interesting. I assume it's going to be a bit like, didn't Empire have something similar where you could charge when you they kind of had it, didn't they? Where you could charge.
Well, I think they.
Go on.
Yeah, I think it was literally called countercharge. It was for their detachment system, and I say kinda just because no one used detachments because they weren't really that useful. Like the way the rules were written didn't really give them a benefit, so they basically never got used. Previous versions, if chat can help out, previous versions of the detachment system for Empire might have had a better version of countercharge. But this gives me the impression that it's actually something entirely different.
Potentially, I like the idea that potentially what we do see is maybe it's just a generic ability to, if you do charge into a unit, the enemy unit has the ability to recharge you. Maybe if you haven't moved, you have access to a counter charge sort of a situation. So you can set up like a bait and trap, which I think is quite fun. And it does mean that faster units are more caught out. If you're able to go really fast and then charge in, way ahead of the opponent, but the opponent, hasn't moved the turn previously, then they can just be like, well, now I'm going to countercharge. So because movement is king in all war games. The faster you are, or the more threat projection you can get, which is movement plus ability to apply damage, the more you can do that, then the more useful that unit generally tends to be. So the ability to mitigate movement, and we've talked about skirmishes and other stuff, which is a great way as well. But that might be a really nice way to kind of be like, whoa, slow your horses, literally. You're going to get countercharged, which is nice. I like that. Setting up something, that's good.
So here's a thought that I have. So we've seen that in the basically combat res portion that there might be something called pushback. So basically, instead of running down your opponent, there might be a scenario where the two units, the unit just gets literally pushed back on the table. Here, countercharge seems to be referring to the unit being charged at. So it's not like their buddies jumping in with a countercharge. It's something to do with the unit itself. And this makes me wonder. This makes me wonder if maybe a key part of maybe mission design will be table control, like say over a center line. Or over, different like strips of the battlefield, so that it is important for you to be further up table than being hanging out in your deployment zone. It's important for you to actually hold ground. Perhaps countercharge just means that you come out and meet your opponent, and therefore you're not giving up the ground. Something like that. It might be to me something that's useful in how they build their mission mechanics.
Ooh, or potentially, I suppose this is talking about charge reactions. I like the okay. I was thinking maybe like after combat, you could do some, like if you ended up being charged, won the combat, and not only just charge the opposing unit down, but recharge. But I think that would come later in the steps.
Or countercharge could even maybe just nullify the charge bonus. We haven't seen yet what sort of a bonus you get for charging. Do you strike first, for example? Like that's a big deal too. Is that 8th edition fantasy went to an initiative-based determination for who strikes first. So if you got charged, you were getting hit no matter who it was that was charging you. Whereas in 8th edition fantasy, if you're a bunch of witch elves and you get charged, they're still cutting you down before you have a chance. So maybe countercharge is some way to mitigate the chargers go first in combat. There's a lot of things it could be, and I think I can't wait to find out so much more about this game.
Me too. It's very exciting. The second step is actually make your charge moves to establish the range of their charge. You just roll 2 dice, pick the highest score from the 2, and then add it to their movement characteristics. This means the unit of Skeleton Warriors has a charge range of between 5 and 10 inches. But Bretonnian Knights are rather more dangerous. Their Swift Stride special rule adds an extra d6 inches to every charge they make. If you're in range, a kind of wheeling move. We'll just cover that. Like, that's fine.
Yeah.
Right?
So this is a big change, first and foremost, to the random charge distance determination, and it does remind me a lot of how Warhammer Armies Project does it. I can't remember, Chad, if anyone remembers. I don't know if it's 2d6 pick the lowest or not, but it's certainly at the very least the way they did it was d6 plus your movement, and that basically made it so you still had random charges, but what you didn't get was the long bomb. So like on 2d6, that means that you have up to 12 inches that you can charge plus your movement distance if you're a human being. That gives you a potential charge range of 16 inches. So immediately here, you're actually making the table a little bit bigger because the threat ranges have been shortened, and it's going to be I think that's really good, especially when we factor in for the larger bases and things. It means there's actually more room to maneuver on the table because the longest potential distance isn't that far. The other thing that's cool about doing 2d6 pick the lowest and how the math works out is that the most likely result is not, I wish I had the chart memorized, but actually we're all going to have to memorize this chart. But, like the average charge distance with 2d6 pick the lowest, I think is like.
Wait,
I can't remember.
2d6 is 7. 2d6 pick the lowest is 5. 2d6 pick the highest is 9.
Yeah?
Yeah.
All right, there you go. So 9 inches would be your average charge, which is a bit less than, your 12-inch charge from 6th edition, but a lot less than the potential for a 16-inch long bomb.
But it is pick the highest dice. It is pick the highest dice on 2d6.
Sorry, I was thinking drop the lowest, but yeah, pick the highest would probably be the more correct way to say that.
Pick the highest. So that's what it'll be. So it's 2d6, but it's pick the highest of 1, right? And add it to your movement.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah. It is good. Like, I do like that because I learned a valuable lesson in Warhammer Fantasy Battle that I've taken through to every war game since, where I lost a game at an event once just because someone rolled 2 12-inch charges back to back, like a 12-inch charge and a 12-inch charge, and I was like, okay. I was like, okay. Like, what you do if you don't want to be charged is you make it impossible for you to be charged versus probable that they won't charge you, and that's a good thing. So knowing that like it's capped slightly less, I think is good. You talk about the board being more open because of that. That's quite interesting because I'm assuming that we're playing 6x4 boards, but that is not a guarantee. Obviously, Games Workshop standard now for 40k and Age of Sigmar is 44 by 60 inches. They even sell mats that fit into that, and I do wonder if the Old World has got enough leg room that they're allowed to be told it's not 6x4. We'll see. Or if they'll create a mission pack, which it doesn't matter on your board size, I guess. They might have like a suggested board size. James Workshop generally quite cowardly.
We're going full on 8x12. All right.
8x12.
I know. I've been hoarding 6x4 mats with great confidence. I can't imagine it'd be less than that, but we'll see. I think what the original, like, Warhammer was kind of originally crafted on, whatever the default size of a sheet of plywood was. So like these games were played on very, very large surfaces to start with. And I would hope it stays 6x4. I think every inch counts.
Okay. Yeah, interesting. Horus Heresy uses 6x4. Okay, so there's a good confirmation that it is 6x4. Okay, I would even put that in the bank that it's going to be 6x4 now. Consider that to be a Rob guess, which Rob guesses the coffee shops normally work out quite well. So
I think we've also speculated 6x4 previous to this. Another implication though of slower. So this is also interesting because another field. So a lot of this to me is like there's so much about 8th edition that was fantastic, and so many obvious things that could have been tweaked to make it like really, 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 really good. And one of those things to me was just how sort of hamstrung cavalry was, because they really didn't have that much of an outsized charge distance over, foot infantry, because you were rolling 2d6, adding your movement. So if your movement is 7 inches for a barded warhorse, versus you're really getting an extra 3 inches of potential charge. They did have swift stride, so it was more likely that you would roll a higher charge. Swift stride didn't work like this, but anyway, I really, really like now that we're starting already to see some benefits to cavalry, because cavalry, the interaction between cavalry and infantry is what a rank and flank game is all about. Like, that is one of the key elements. And having slower infantry as well, meaning that your armies will, generally speaking, take longer to get to grips, because your biggest turn move, aside from a march now, would generally be your charge. Otherwise, you're just moving double movement. Means that you're probably going to get an extra round of shooting in before you're able to close the distance.
Interesting.
So again, how is shooting mitigated? Because I've heard you. I don't know this for a fact, but shooting can be a big deal in close combat centric games, like, for example, AOS. You need to be able to balance that.
I think that's always been a misnomer, that AOS is a fighting game and 40k is a shooting game. It kind of makes sense, space battles is guns. I think that's kind of like an ad hoc shorthand people have used. Both metas have been dominated by combat or shooting, depending on which army is the strongest at that point, whatever is the broken mechanic. And the fighting over objectives normally almost always adheres to there needing to be something to fight something on an objective and maintain its position on an objective, which is normally not shooting. And so both, I think, but you're right though, like the ability to close down a gun line versus the ability to fight, and again, the language is really developed. It's really interesting now, because I haven't really thought tons about Warhammer Fantasy or the 8th edition, the game state, but 6 to 8 years in professionally covering war games and doing it for Games Workshop, where I was starting to write myself language and how I would communicate information, thinking back and just, understanding unit roles. And I know obviously the designers at Games Workshop have also been through this experience as well. And we've really developed as a community. So understanding that closing down shooting is really important, mitigating that output so you could survive. Will shooting be overpowered are all great questions. I think it feels like the cavalry is very fast. So being able to mitigate some of that shooting I'm not immediately assuming that shooting is overpowered. I'm just saying that it opens up the opportunity for it to be more impactful, especially ballistic skill shooting or mass shooting, which really wasn't much of a thing in 8th edition, with the exception of a few outliers. Looking at you, Storm Fiends. So yeah, it was it's just. I'm just curious to see how that interacts, because there's also a piece of me that really loves the idea of having a pike and shot style army for the Empire, where you do have a line of handgunners who can rip off a bunch of volleys and then get the hell out of there, and you've got some spearmen there to deal with the charges and such, stuff like that. If the relative power of the two is handled correctly, it'd be great. I also wanted to say, Nurgle Matthew in chat pointing out that confirming that Warhammer Armies Project charge was 2d6, pick the highest and add it to the movement characteristic, making this the second WAP rule I've seen directly lifted by our friends at SDS. Kudos to you guys. I wouldn't be mad if they just stole a lot of stuff from the community. I would if they didn't then be like the guy at Warhammer Armies Project gets several boxes free, right? You just send him everything. You're like, hey, thanks for doing this. Here's the launch box, the books. You're on the influencer list. There you go.
They sent him something, all right.
Yeah, a cease and desist is what they sent him.
By the way, mate, we got it all. You can take it down now. Thanks.
We've written it all down. We put it in our own book. Thank you.
We printed it off. Printed it off.
Not very square bast of them, let's be honest.
But yeah, I again, like the best rules are use the best rules, and sometimes those are ideas that already exist out there. Yeah.
Well, okay, yeah. I mean, whatever. It's Games Workshop. They're like, see my upcoming video, Games Workshop, the biggest IP thieves of all time? Question mark. Right. Okay. So, legit a video I'm going to make.
IP is only indefensible when it's not theirs. Yes.
Yeah. Right. If you're in range, accounted for wheeling, moving the charging unit into base contact with its target, bringing the maximum number of models from both sides into combat. If you whiff the roll, however, the charge has failed. The unit must move the full distance rolled towards its target, but your warriors haven't got the impetus to complete the charge, and now they're ripe to being hit back in the next turn. The third step accounts for compulsory moves. This is
actually there's something delicious to go into on that too, if you don't mind.
Yeah, please.
So you actually you never played anything earlier than 8th, right? 8th was your first edition?
That's correct, yeah.
So in 8th, the wheel is free. So you measured, basically you roll your 2d6, you'd find out what your charge range is. If you were closest to closest in range, you could make your charge, and you were allowed an infinite wheel to do that, including the wheel in the amount of movement needed to make the charge. It's going to make wheeling very contentious. So like if you roll like a 10-inch charge and you're, I don't know, 8 inches away, like whether or not you use up that 2 inches in the wheel is a very big deal now. So I don't like it for that reason. I like free wheels because, again, wheels are kind of hard to measure accurately, especially since they brought back the old wheeling mechanic, which we're going to see. So to me, this is another thing now that's going to slow down the game. And by that, I mean, make it so that you're not getting into combat as quickly, because even so your charge range has shortened and now wheels are included in that charge. So again, the distance that you can actually cover is reduced, and it's going to it's going to make your battle line formation that much more important.
I see what you're saying, because flanking will be harder to do generally.
Reacting to flanking actually is what's probably going to be harder to do. So like if you have, fast cav that can sort of, generally speaking, has a narrow cavalry will generally speaking have a narrower frontage, which means they have the fulcrum is shorter, so your wheels are tighter. They're probably going to be in better positions to be able to get around to charge somebody. Whereas if you're a big wide unit of infantry, it's going to be very hard for you to charge something that's not immediately in front of you.
Oh, yeah, that is. Why isn't the wheel? Why wouldn't the wheel be free? I hope the wheel's free. Because it's
not. They say that it's not. And so if you scroll up.
Accounting for wheeling. If you're in range, accounting for wheeling, and then there's a double asterisk on this. The distance.
So let's go read the editors now. Let's get to the editors now.
Is deducted from its charge. Ugh. Yeah. Gross.
Yeah.
Absolutely gross. Yeah. Why? Oh. Just make wheeling free. FAQ. Wheeling's free. Carry on with your lives.
See. But that's something that, for example, again, the 6th edition crowd would be very comfortable with. So that is a normal thing. But that to me kind of undercuts pre-measuring a little bit, just because of the inaccuracy of how you measure a wheel.
So people in the chat not really sure about how this works. So I'll try and explain again. Effectively, when you're imagine two squares, and those two squares are directly in front of each other. You charge, you roll your distance, and you connect them both so they're flush connected with each other. Now imagine one of those squares is they're corner to corner. So one is at the side of the other square. You're charging, and because of where you are, you're in the flank. So you're in the side of the other square as opposed to the front. So when you charge, you must connect at the side of the square as opposed to the front of the square. And then because you don't connect, because you travel in a straight line, that means that your square and the other square is going to have a gap in between it. So then what you do is you wheel the unit, or you close that gap like a vice. And then that distance you have to include in your charge, which is a circular distance. So you now are not measuring a linear line, you're measuring a circular line from the edge, and that becomes a real problem, and it sucks, basically.
So I don't want to confuse. So this is we're exposing the complexity of fantasy battles now. But it's not. This is not. This isn't closing the door. Closing the door isn't the wheel they're talking about. What they're talking about is like, for example, because you can see sort of like you have like a 45 degree on the front of each unit. If you can think of it this way, if you can see a unit that's between here and here on like to the side of your unit. So if you go straight, you would miss the unit you're charging. So in that case, you would have to tilt your unit and then charge at it to get it. And it's that tilt, it's that initial wheel. That's what they're saying is part of the
not the close the gap.
Not closing the door. Closing the door is a very different thing. Yeah.
Closing the door. So that's way better then. That's fine.
It's not nearly like that would be brutal. You would be able that would be super brutal. So yeah, no, it's just the wheel to be able to make contact with the unit you're charging. And then once you make contact, then you would basically close the door. That final thing is not a wheel. And then you would basically shift them so that the most amount of people are in combat.
God, because that sounded awful the way I described it. Okay, thank goodness. Okay, love that. Okay, that's actually way better. Most of my reservations are gone because you just do a quick shifty. It's going to be an inch at most. You're going to be like, poof, that's it. Okay, they really should have done a picture for that because I walked away from that being like, that sucks.
Yeah.
All right, and let's hope it's not that. Are you confirmed? Like you read that thoroughly and you're like, yeah, defo, that's the way.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. That close the door thing has never been called. That's never been called a wheel. It's always been closing the door. We'll learn about that when we get to the combat phase, I assume. Or actually, surprisingly, it's not in this because it would be part of movement.
Oh, I am relieved. That's true. I'm really relieved. Okay, that's great. All right. Next up, the third step accounts for compulsory moves. This is mostly to accommodate fleeing units that failed to rally during the last strategy phase, but includes other rarer moves such as random movement for Night Goblin fanatics or Stone Trolls who have failed their stupidity test. The fourth step covers remaining moves, regular maneuvers that don't result in combat. Okay, normal stuff.
This is something that they say above, which again, it might just be games designers, community article writers not knowing the ins and outs. But they say the only way to reach combat is to declare a charge, which actually, generally speaking, in previous editions, is not true. Random movers, because they move randomly, they never were able to declare charges. And so things like a steam tank or a goblin fanatic or pump wagons, these had like 3d6 movement. And this would happen after charges are declared. So they had the benefit of actually being able to charge something without eliciting a charge reaction because they're wild cards, right? So, a steam tank can hit you because you don't know how far it's necessarily going to lurch, so you can't really react to it, I guess is the idea. Mm-hmm. So I'm curious to know if random movers now, charge in a more traditional sense, or if they just were, if I'm reading too closely into the Warhammer community things.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I think probably a lot of this isn't covered like in detail, but we got the gist, which is good. The mechanics of movement, as you expect from the game, multi-model, moving units acting in concert. Movement in Warhammer the Old World is fairly involved. In general, units may move or march, performing maneuvers on the way. In the first case, they may move up to their movement characteristic and may then shoot later in the turn. In the latter case, they may double their pace, but they sacrifice the ability to perform any maneuver more complex than a wheel and their ability to shoot this turn for speed. While this unit may wheel, in which the unit pivots from one turn to the next, measuring distance from the outside model, you may also turn all units models through 90 or 108 degrees, spending a quarter of your movement to reach for each 90 degrees, move backwards or sideways at half pace, and redress the ranks or reform.
That's some interesting stuff in there.
Okay, tell me about it.
Well, for one thing, this is actually a bit of a disappointment for me, is how they measure wheels. I would have loved to see wheels just be off this, like, I don't know. I would rather wheels really weren't like so punitive, because it just doesn't, it makes a difficult to measure, is to me a place where the game could really be simplified. Whereas like maybe you're allowed one pivot on the center per move or something like that, rather than having to measure the distance the outside model goes. Because again, on a wide unit, if you're just like turning a little bit, you could imagine like this guy, if it's here, you're going that far. If it's a narrow unit, this guy going to here, you're going that far, right? Yeah. So like it makes it does make a big difference to the total distance the unit can move, and it impacts maneuverability and all that kind of stuff. But again, getting that measurement accurate is pretty tricky. And this is also one of those things where we tend to get hung up on whether or not like things are actually accurately accounted for. Just moving in a straight line on the tabletop, like in AOS or 40K or any other game like this, doing it accurately is probably never happened in the history of these games. So, so having a mechanic like a wheel kind of assumes that you are able to accurately measure these types of things consistently, and I just don't have that kind of confidence in measuring tape systems. I think to me it would have been better to say that in a unit's move they get one free pivot off of its center. You don't have to measure anything, and then they just get to move. But so that would be one of my small disappointments.
I think movement is one of those interesting things that's so important that especially in a game like you said, the dice numbers are actually fairly low. Add a d6 to your move. An inch is huge in like if you can pivot or not pivot. Like, did you pivot an inch or did you pivot 2 inches? Is a massive difference in the math on rolling that charge. So maybe I would have liked to have seen something a little bit more liberal in that stage with the movement. And again, like tape measures are pretty inaccurate. A good thing is always, to use measuring sticks. They're very good. And they're used.
Yeah, I guess or like a movement gauge, like a gauge of some kind would be useful here. Maybe like that old that AOS combat gauge, which is what, like 2 inches.
Oh, so pretty commonly now in tournament gaming is the use of, like, normally someone has a tray of different range sticks. Like 9-inch sticks are very common, obviously, because of deep strikes. So everyone has a bunch of those. Everyone has a bunch of 3s and 2s. But, lots of people on Etsy and other places, they sell your classic, coming soon to the Squarebase store. But they do sell your measuring sticks, and that does make the game much simpler. Like, it's much more linear, it's much easier to do, and honestly, they're pretty much my preference now.
Well, the problem is with wheeling, because the frontage is what determines it. I put the Litco. There's a Litco there's an example of a gauge or a widget for wheeling that I just threw up in stream chat. But you can see that the solution, you can tell it's a little complicated. So if you click on the little pictures, you can see how they kind of operate. Each one of those gauges are designed for a different size frontage. So in this case, a unit of 520 millimeter bases. If they go from if they were to complete that move, that's 1 inch. But the thing is, you need a different gauge for each frontage you have. And that's probably going to be the problem you're going to have with with any kind of widget that attempts to do this accurately. I was talking with Danny on Grim After Dark last night, and he said that you will often see they look like protractors, which are used for determining arc of sight. He said that they also used to be used for measuring wheels. You could put inches on sort of the convex edge of it to try and get a measurement, but it wouldn't be accurate because different frontages are going to result in different distances. So again, I'm beating a horse here, but this is one of those opportunities, I think, to have simplified a mechanic that's it's slow to measure them, it's fraught, and it's easy to get wrong, and it has kind of, because you don't have a big budget in your movement ranges, it's kind of a pain in the butt to do it well, and it can cause probably some consternation at the table sometimes. Yes, totally overthinking this, but hey, we get one article a week. Come on, RB Grim, we gotta really get into the nitty gritty here.
I'm not sure it's overthinking it. I think it's an important factor. As discussed several times in this, and at one point, the fear from me is one of the things that modern game design has done really nicely is it's taken away a lot of discussion points where, I don't want you to make a charge, pretty much. I mean, I do, I'm having fun, but I don't want you to make that charge. And if you don't make it by an inch, it sucks, and I'm sorry, but you didn't make it. That's an important factor. So those, at the right moment, become these kind of hot button issues in a conversation, which is a real problem. And a game should be working towards interactivity that's enjoyable, not interactivity which is non-enjoyable. Like that's why I like the charge reactions. It's a very you and me thing. You're going to charge me, I'm going to do a thing. It's like there's an entire experience there where we're both involved in what's occurring. Where so having these very open, and that has always been a problem with these movement tray style games. Movement has been a problem, measuring has been a problem, because it's a game of geometry versus a game of straight lines.
I mean, in general, movement is going to be a lot more accurate. You're generally speaking moving across a flat table, with very little intervening terrain. You're able to get the tape measure right down. You can you can literally take dice and block the unit off and get real. So you can actually get a degree of accuracy here. That's better than some other situations. But wheeling to me is just sort of to me. And also, if you're pre-measuring a charge, for example, that's a kind of a pain in the dick to try and pre-measure that, because you're going to have to block your unit off with dice, move the unit, and measure that wheel in order to figure out what it is accurately and come to a reasonable conclusion with your opponent. This is assuming you're playing someone kind of grindy, but I think rules should be written with the assumption that your opponent is grinding you, that your opponent isn't going to give you every single quarter. Because then, if you write it that way, then the majority of us who can just play and have a good time and realize that you're going to give an inch and take an inch as the game goes on, we can figure that out. But you want the rules to support the scenarios or reduce the opportunities for scenarios where you're going to have conflict between, two players.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Well, because loads of the rules sound like they're really engaging. That's an important factor. Lots of those rules sound really fun. I love the formations thing. And ultimately I do love just moving one brick of dudes versus each individual dude. That makes a lot of sense as well. And a shout out to Charlie in the chat, who's pointed out that, again, one of those really nice things about this game is that they've been able to look at other game systems, and if they have played Star Wars Legion, they have a really nice way of doing it where the sergeant or the leader of a squad, you measure only ever from them when you're moving. Mm-hmm. Move them, and then you just reform the unit around it. Obviously, with a game made out of movement trays, that obviously wouldn't work quite as well. But that's a really elegant and nice system for moving big blocks immediately. And then you're not I don't need to measure 30 guys and move 30 guys. I measure one guy and I reform the rest. It's really nice.
So something to point out, we'll see how it goes when I imagine when we learn about, for example, single unit, so single model entities. So a dragon or a guy on a horse. Those guys don't have to wheel. They just move on their center. So I don't see why you couldn't have the ability to do the same thing for the rank and file units. Just move on the center. You don't have to measure the stupid wheel. Yes, that's free movement, but we've already seen that they've really reduced the overall amount of movement you're getting in this game. So anyway, that's it. Although anyway, we could talk in circles on this. There was still some other interesting.
Well, hey! We can never talk in circles. We talk in
squares. Only squares. My mistake. Hey. Back on the article, can you go back, because there actually was something new in the article, which and my ancient Warhammer ancient battles, ancient whatever it was,
Warhammer Ancients
homies in the chat. Perhaps you can tell us more about this. But so we have the wheel. You may also turn on units models, though, 90 or 180 degrees, spending a quarter of your movement for each 90 degrees. So that's pretty cool. So that's not a full blown reform, but for example, with a marching column, you could run up the table, at triple speed, and then you could do a quarter turn, and now you're 90 degrees facing the flanks of your enemy, and you're in a very wide formation that's great for combat. Maybe not too deep, but again, going on some previous articles, everyone in the front rank gets to fight. So that's new. We haven't. I don't think you could just pivot in place in 8th edition. You could move backwards or sideways at a half pace, which is sometimes useful. And I have no idea. Everyone else's guess would be as good as mine. What redress the ranks would be. Redress from my air cadet days, doing drill, marching up and down the square. Redressing ranks is essentially getting back into an organized formation. So say you've been marching and you come to a halt, you might be a little jostled up, and so you would redress ranks and get shift back into position. So that suggests to me that there might be scenarios where you become disorderly, or like there's a way for ranks to sort of get out of joint. Perhaps it's a version of a reform that's a little bit less. Maybe it's shifting dudes around in the back rank. Who knows?
It could be units.
So I'm interested because
could it be models stepping up from slain models on a front rank?
Interesting.
Could be that. That would be interesting as well. Yeah, like that is something new, definitely. But like we've said, like many of these phases have had almost no game design ever put into them. So just being able to come up with a few generic ones, and then again some units that can do some unique ones themselves in those phases, it's going to be really fun. Very fun. There's going to be a lot of opportunity for some fun, unique, especially making units play the way they're meant to play. So there's not as much ludonarrative dissonance. There'll be some really fun stuff in there. There'll be some fun stuff in there, I think, because it does look like all those. It's not just a redress. There is expansion in the rule sets of those sections, which looks cool.
Yeah, I mean they've added. They've made some really obviously distinct choices here, and there's clear again. What did I want to see when I started seeing details? I wanted to see care for the game, systematically, especially. So, systemically, like, are they considering, the butterfly effects of the choices that they're making here? And so far, I'm only seeing that this is a heavily considered game that has been weighed against the experiences of previous versions of this game, and not even just this game by the looks of it. We are seeing influence from stuff outside of fantasy battles. And honestly, like, there is a whole world, obviously, of rank and flank games out there to draw from as well. But this really is starting to feel like an excellent, in a lot of ways, like I kind of felt Warhammer Armies Project was, which was a great compromise, incorporating a lot of very cool mechanics from across the full catalog of fantasy battles games. So I'm nothing but like enthused by the direction that we've been seeing. It's shaping up real nice. The formation is strong.
The next article does say that they're going to be talking about shooting next, which is fun. They're going through the phases.
Yeah, shooting is going to be interesting because, like I said, ballistic skill shooting especially was very tricky because basically, if you were over half range, that's going to be a -1 penalty. If you moved, it was a -1 penalty. Most people were ballistic skill 3. That's sort of your average tier, shooting ability. So, very easily, if you were shooting through any sort of, terrain, that would be a -1 penalty. So you were easily shooting, hitting on 6s in a lot of scenarios. And so it was, not the greatest. And the way they got around that in 8th edition as the games went is that, you basically you got units that just, for whatever reason, they just ignored all those things. So, you could move and shoot without penalty. You could shoot at long range without penalty. Looking at you, Storm Fiends. You could, they basically created units that just ignored all of the stuff that really kept a lid on ranged ballistic skill based shooting. And that wasn't, I think, a great way to solve it. So I'm really curious to see how do they solve it. Are there ways to mitigate, those movement penalties? Is there going to be a range penalty, like a long range, basically over half range penalty like they had in 8th, and I assume other editions before that. So yeah, we'll see. The shooting phase will be quite interesting.
I just can't wait to shout 10 from the back. That's it. That's where I'm at. I just want to shout 10 from the back and have a great time. That's all I want from my game right now. Just want to do that. It's going to be really fun. So I don't know about you, but I'm excited. Excited to see where this goes. The shooting phase, shouting 10 from the back. I think it's going to be a fun time for all of us. And what's your kind of general feelings about the movement? Are you happy? You said you were happy, right?
Yeah, movement absolutely is super cool. And there's as much nuance as we were able to pull out of it just looking at what they revealed. There's so many more elements that are as we actually get the full details of, that's really seems going to create really toolsy and nuanced foundation for this game, because again, like rank and flank, it's in the name of the style of game, right? So having all of those extra ways to reorganize your units, move them around, while at the same time reducing kind of their ability to get into combat at a long distance, I think that makes the table a little bit bigger. It helps offset the increasing footprint from just going from 20 millimeter to 25 millimeter bases. It's all real positive here, and I'm going to assume it's a 6x4 table. That to me is probably table stakes, if you will, Rob. And then with shooting, like I said, I think there's a lot of opportunity to streamline some things with shooting, specifically around how ranges work, hit modifiers. It's a tough thing, I'm sure, for them to figure out where the right sweet spot is. But again, as 8th edition went on, more and more of the ballistic skill based shooting units just ignored those penalties. Wood elves, for example, with true flight arrows, and I've been practicing for Square Base GT against a wood elf player, and I just keep being like, yo, bro, like you just bring more archers, dude. Like, don't mess around with other garbage. Like, just the fact that they don't take any penalties means you can't hide, except if you're completely out of line of sight. It just makes them devastating. And that's because it ignores, and you kind of referred to this last week, we're getting all these rules that, immediately certain armies will just ignore. So it's a question of like, how high up do you make that shooting penalty for people without any special rules? Because then when you get units that then ignore those special rules, is the gap between them going to be this, or is it like 8th edition where it's like this? Well, where, a wood elf archer is like so much better than any other archer in the game.
Well, I mean, that makes sense. Like, and you would like that to be what they do, but the issue is like, are they so good at it that it becomes something that is unmanageable in the game? And that's that classic situation, because everyone does want all of those armies to play differently, and also all those units to play differently, as do I. It's really hard. And that's why all of these different game companies are still working on developing. But what's nice is seeing them pick and choose some rules, which are fun. And I honestly am very excited. Just that movement article has made me more enthusiastic. The pictures were really good. It, like you say, made me really feel like they're thinking about it, which is nice. And if the same love and dedication has been put into kind of, the background and the ongoing narrative, we've got ourselves we already know we've got an amazing universe. We already know we've got loads of great miniatures that you can put into that universe. So then, having great lore that's been loved and then great game that's been loved, it's an incredible place to build a community around and be a part of a game. So I'm very excited about that. I think it's going to be very fun.
Yeah. And I mean, the era, like, and we've said this in previous shows, the era that they've chosen to base the game in, to me is really the zero, like the era that the game ends in is really more like in 40K terms, it's the Citradix maledictum or whatever. It's like after they're like, they're like 1 second to midnight there. Whereas, they've had some wars again, they've had some battles against chaos in history. But this is the First World War, essentially, that you're coming up to. This is what will become referred to as the Great War against Chaos. And it is preceded by some really, really pivotal moments in the timeline of the lore, which to me makes it easy, both from Games Workshop's perspective, but also from players' perspective, to ignore what they're saying and take your armies and go fight the vampire wars, which happened just maybe a few decades previous to where this game is set. There's Nagash is on the scene maybe a couple hundred years before this is set. There's a lot. The Mordheim happens, a couple, maybe a few decades before this is set. So it really is a great moment in the timeline to pick to start working their way forward from. In that, in a lot of sense, like again, in 40K terms, this is kind of like the Horus Heresy of fantasy. Except to me, Horus Heresy never felt to me like the actual game for 40K. Whereas this, to me, this feels like the timeline it should have. And the bad things that happen in the future are very far off in the future, to the point where you can almost tell yourself, maybe something different can happen this time. And if you have, if you have a perspective of, different timelines, that's totally something that can happen. There's a really good interview that got posted by Jordan Sorcery with Gav Thorpe. And what made it really fascinating, especially to me, was he goes into great detail around the original Storm of Chaos campaign. In Storm of Chaos, they basically ran a global campaign. It was after the original Armageddon campaign. I want to say this would have been the early 2000s somewhere, maybe the mid-aughts. And they got to a place where Chaos was making some progress, and Chaos was a lot more relevant in the setting, because up until then, most of the books were talking about sort of this gathering storm, right? Chaos is present, but it's not like there. There's beastmen in the forest, but there's not like warriors of chaos coming down invading towns. That's kind of the exception, not the rule of existence in the old world at the time. Chaos is waned at this moment. And then Storm of Chaos essentially was this story where through people participating online, they developed this thing where Chaos does break through, and now they are in the world, and they kind of ended the campaign where Chaos is rampaging. Now we are sort of in the end times potentially, and that's kind of where what he wanted, sort of like how they did in 40K, where Cadia falls. Now the setting has changed. We're in a world where, a universe where, the Imperium is divided in half, and like the Immaterium is interacting more with real space, and so the setting has meaningfully changed without arriving at a conclusion. And what I found really, really fascinating about what Gav said is that the real purpose of lore and background and setting and the narrative that they develop and design is more about getting you to a point, and then you finish the story. And it was cool to hear Gav talk, because he gets I don't know. I feel like Gav gets disparaged a lot, because he was also the guy who ran fantasy, I think, during the sort of 6th to 7th transition. But it felt to me like the fact that he was disallowed from moving the setting forward, or changing the setting. Essentially, he was told that no, we can't get 1 second to midnight. We got to be 2 minutes from midnight. And essentially, they retcon the Storm of Chaos campaign out of fantasy as they develop 7th and certainly into 8th, which. He was very delicate with how he's talking. I encourage everyone to go out there and listen again. Jordan Sorcery interviewing Gav Thorpe. You get the full version on his Patreon. But it really felt like Gav was hinting at the fact that was really what ended his time there, was the fact that they would not give him the scope to narratively advance the setting without basically just sort of. It would have changed the world a lot, like what the day-to-day reality of the old world and the fantasy world would have been, but it wasn't the end times. It wasn't actually ending the world. There was no conclusion. You would have to make that conclusion in your own game. So I'm curious to see, when you have a narrative like the old world that's coming now, where there is, much like the Horus Heresy, there is a final climactic endpoint, or at least a logical endpoint to where this goes, which would be, the battle for Prague. The old world uniting under Magnus, the Pious as the emperor, and uniting all of the states. That is a pretty significant conclusion, where we get to how much play do we have between here and there to really determine and have fun with those in this setting.
Also, I think one of the fun bits as well is like lots of the lore was finalized by the end times. They were like, the Lady of the Lake is, like a lot of it was, confirmed as opposed to rumors or hints. And so now they effectively, because the cat's out the bag, they can give us that story, but they can still have the characters be unaware of what's going on. And that's fun as well. Hope we can see some fun stuff in that.
Yeah, you get some dramatic. You get dramatic fallacy where the audience knows, but the characters in the narrative don't. Right? Like so. Sorry, dramatic irony. Sorry, I combined my literary devices. Yeah, dramatic irony is where that happens. And I'm also curious again to see how much license they take, because there is so much in the end times that was just brutal, and because they answered things rather than leaving them open to interest or speculation, or just leaving them as open-ended questions. They actually put periods at the end of sentences. A lot of it was really unsatisfying, including the Lady of the Lake thing. So I'll be curious to see, to our friends at SDS, and I'm hoping someday Black Library, as they expand, the old world lore and maybe have some cool new book series and things that spin off of it. How much do they use end times as like a literal foundation, and how much do they use it as an end point? Namely that, yes, chaos wins in the end, but do the details maybe change a bit? Because I think chaos winning in the end is not the worst part about the end times for a lot of people.
Interesting. I think everyone has an opinion, don't they? Like, I think that's the thing about a setting that people loved so deeply, and I think that's going to be true of the game mechanics as well. But I'm looking forward to it. It's going to be super fun. If you have enjoyed watching this video, though, make sure you go check out all the links below. Like, subscribe, comment, share the video with your friends in your old world /fantasy communities. That's good. We can only build up a positive and based space by you helping us reach more people. So you're going to have to go out there and let people know about the fact that we exist, which is going to be fun. So please do go do that. That would be cool. Otherwise, it will just be us two talking, which will still be great, even if that's all it is. Okay, so let's do that, which will be fun.
Honestly, that's all it is. Fundamentally, that's what this is about, is a little parasocial hangout with Rob and I, and celebration of a game that I've really come to love quite genuinely. So I can't wait to see where this all goes. And thanks for joining us. And like, comment, subscribe.
Peace and love. Val, thanks very much. Chat, thank you very much. Loads of love to you. And a massive, a special thank you to everyone who has supported the show. Loads of love and goodbye.